Self and personality. Introduction. Quite often you must have found yourself engaged in knowing and evaluating your own behavior and that of others. You must have noticed how you react and behave in certain situations in a manner different from others. You may have also often asked questions about your relationship with others. To find an answer to some of these questions, psychologists use the notion of self. Similarly, when we ask questions such as why people are different, how they make different meanings of events, and how they feel and react differently in similar situations, that is, questions relating to variations in behavior, the notion of personality comes into play. Both these concepts, that is, self and personality, are intimately related. Self, in fact, lies at the core of personality. The study of self and personality helps us understand not only who we are, but also our uniqueness as well as our similarities with others. By understanding self and personality, we can understand our own as well as others' behavior in diverse settings. Several thinkers have analyzed the structure and function of self and personality. As a result, we have different theoretical perspectives on self and personality today. This chapter will introduce you to some basic aspects of self and personality. You will also learn some important theoretical approaches to self and personality and certain methods of personality assessment. Self and personality. Self and personality refer to our characteristics, ways in which we define our existence. They also refer to the ways in which our experiences are organized and show up in our behavior. From common observation, we know that different people hold different ideas about themselves. These ideas represent the self of a person. We also know that different people behave in different ways in a given situation, but the behavior of a particular person from one situation to another generally remains fairly stable. Such a relatively stable pattern of behavior represents the personality of that person. Thus, different persons seem to possess different personalities. These personalities are reflected in the diverse behavior of persons. Concept of self. From your childhood days, you may have spent considerable time thinking about who you are and how you are different from others. By now, you already may have developed some idea about yourself, although you may not be aware about it. Let us try to have some preliminary notions of ourself by completing act. How easy was it to complete these sentences? How much time did you take? Perhaps it was not as easy as you have thought it. While working on it, you were describing yourself. You are aware of yourself in the same way you are aware of various objects in your surrounding environment, such as a chair or a table in your home. A newly born child has no idea of itself. As a child grows older, the idea of self emerges and its formation begins. Parents, friends, teachers, and other significant persons play a vital role in shaping a child's idea about self. Our interaction with other people, our experiences, and the meaning we give to them serve as the basis of our self. The structure of self is modifiable in the light of our own experiences and the experiences we have of other people. This you will notice if you exchange list you completed under activity 2.1 with your other friends. Notice what they have done. You will find that they have produced a very long list of attributes about what they identify themselves. The attributes they have used for identification tells us about their personal as well as social or cultural identities. Personal identity refers to those attributes of a person that make her or him different from others. When a person describes herself or himself by telling her or his name, or her or his qualities or characteristics, or her or his potentialities or capabilities, or her or his beliefs, she or he is disclosing her or her personal identity. Social identity refers to those aspects of a person that link her or him to a social or cultural group. or are derived from it. When someone says that she is a Hindu or a Muslim, a Brahmin or a Adivasi, or a North Indian or South Indian, or something like these, she or he is trying to indicate her or his social identity. These descriptions characterize the way people mentally represent themselves as a person. Thus, self refers to the totality of an individual's conscious experiences, ideas, thoughts, and feelings with regard to herself or himself. These experiences and ideas define the existence of an individual both at the personal and the social levels, self as subject and self as object. If you return to your friend's description, you'll find that they have described themselves either as an entity that does something or as an entity on which something is done. In the former case, the self is described as a subject. In the latter case, the self is described as an object. This means that self can be understood as a subject as well as an object. When you say I know who I am, the self is being described as a knower as well as something that can be known. As a subject and self actively engages in the process of knowing itself, as an object comes to known, this dual status of self should always be kept in mind. Kinds of self. There are several kinds of self. They get formed as a result of our interaction with our physical and socio-cultural environments. The first element of self may be noticed when a newborn child cries for milk when it is hungry. Although this cry is based on reflex, this later on leads to development of awareness that I am hungry. This biological self in the context of socio-cultural environment modifies itself. While you may feel hungry for a chocolate, an Eskimo may not. A distinction is made between personal and social self. The personal self leads to an orientation in which one feels primarily concerned with himself. We have talked about how our biological needs lead to development of a biological self, but soon a child's psychological and social needs in the context of her or his environment lead other components of personal self to emerge. Emphasis comes to be laid on those aspects of life that relate only to the concerned person, such as personal freedom, personal responsibility, personal achievement, or personal comforts. Social self emerges in relation with others and emphasizes such aspects of life as cooperation, unity, affiliation, sacrifice, support, or sharing. This self values family and social relationship, hence, it is also referred to as familial or relational self. Cognitive and behavioral aspects of self. Psychologists from all parts of the world have shown interest in the study of self. These studies have brought out many aspects of our behavior related to self. As indicated earlier, all of us carry within us a sense of who we are and what makes us different from everyone else. We cling to our personal and social identities and feel safe in the knowledge that it remains stable in our lifetime. The way we perceive ourselves and the ideas we hold about our competencies and attributes is called self concept. At a very general level, this view of oneself is overall either positive or negative. At a more specific level, a person may have a very positive view of her or his athletic bravery, but a negative view of her or his academic talents. At an even more specific level, one may have a positive self concept about one's reading ability, but a negative one about one's mathematical skills. Finding out an individual's self concept is not easy. The most frequently used method involves asking the person about herself or himself. Self esteem is an important aspect of self. As persons, we always make some judgment about our own value or worth. This value judgment of a person about herself or himself is called esteem. Some people have high self-esteem, whereas others may have low self-esteem. In order to assess self-esteem, we can present a variety of statements to a person or ask her or him to indicate the extent to which those statements are true for her or him. For example, we may ask a child to indicate the extent of which statements such as I am good at homework, or I am the one usually chosen for games, or I am highly liked by my peers are true of her or him. If a child reports these statements to be true for her or him, her or his self-esteem will be high in comparison to someone who says no. Studies indicate that by the age of 6 to 7 years, children seem to have formed self-esteem at least 4 areas: academic competence, social competence, physical or athletic competence, which become more refined with age. Our capacity to view ourselves in terms of stable dispositions permit us to combine separate self-evaluations into general psychological image of ourselves. This is known as an overall sense of self-esteem. Self-esteem shows a strong relationship with our everyday behavior. For example, children with high academic self-esteem perform better in schools than those with low academic self-esteem, and children with high social self-esteem are more liked by their peers than those with low social self-esteem. On the other hand, children with so low self-esteem in all areas are often found to display anxiety, depression, and increasingly antisocial behavior. Studies have shown that warm and positive parenting helps in the development of high self-esteem among children, as it allows them to know that they are accepted as competent and worthwhile. Children whose parents help or make decisions for them even when they do not need assistance often suffer from low self-esteem. Self-efficacy is another important aspect of herself. People differ in the extent to which they believe they themselves control their life outcomes, or the outcomes are controlled by luck or fate or other situational factors. Example: passing an examination. A person who believes that he/she has the ability or behaviors required by a particular situation demonstrates high self-efficacy. The notion of self-efficacy is based on Bandura's social learning theory. Bandura's initial studies showed that children and adults learned behavior by observing and imitating others. People's expectations of mastery or achievement and their conviction about their own effectiveness also determine the types of behavior in which they would engage, as also the amount of risk they would undertake. A strong sense of self-efficacy allows people to select, influence, and even construct the circumstances of their own life. People with a strong sense of self-efficacy also feel less fearful. Self-efficacy can be developed. People with high self-efficacy have been found to stop smoking at the moment they decide to do so. Our society, our parents, and our own positive experiences can help in the development of a strong sense of self-efficacy by presenting positive models during the formative years of children. Self-regulation. Self-regulation refers to our ability to organize, monitor our own behavior. People who are able to change their behavior according to the demands of external environment are high on self-monitoring. Many situations of life require resistance to situational pressures and control over ourselves. This becomes possible through what is commonly known as willpower. As human beings, we can control our behavior as the way we want. We often decide to delay or defer dissatisfaction of certain needs. Learning to delay or defer the gratification of needs is called self-control. Self-control plays a key role in the fulfillment of long-term goals. Indian cultural tradition provides us with certain effective mechanisms for developing self-control. A number of psychological techniques for self-control have also been suggested. Observation of own behavior is one of them. This provides us with necessary information that may be used to change, modify, or strengthen certain aspects of self. Self-instruction is another important technique. We often instruct ourselves to do something and behave the way we want. Such instructions are quite effective in self regulation. Self reinforcement is the third technique. This involves rewarding behaviors that have pleasant outcomes. For example, you may go to see a movie with friends if you have done well in the examination. These techniques have been tried out and found quite effective with respect to self regulation and self control. Culture and self. Several aspects of self esteem to be linked to the characteristic features of the culture to which an individual lives. Analysis of self carried out in Indian culture context reveals a number of important features that are distinct from those found in the Western cultural context. The most important distinction between the Indian and the Western views is the way boundary is drawn between self and the other. In Western view, this boundary appears to be relatively fixed. The Indian view of self, on the other hand, is characterized by the shifting nature of this boundary. Thus, our self at one moment of time expands to fuse with the cosmos or include the others, but the next moment it seems to be completely withdrawn from it and focused fully on individual self. The Western view seems to hold clear dichotomies between self and other, man and nature, subjective and objective. The Indian view does not make such clear dichotomies. Illustrate this relationship, figure 2.1. In the Western culture, the self and the group exist as two different entities with clearly defined boundaries. Individual members of the group maintain their individuality. In the Indian culture, the self is generally not separated from one's own group. Rather, both remain in the state of harmonious coexistence. In the Western culture, on the other hand, they often remain at a distance. That is why many Western cultures are characterized as individualistic, and many Asian cultures are characterized as collectivistic. Concept of personality. The term personality often refers in our day-to-day discussion. The literal meaning of personality is derived from the Latin word persona, the mask used by actors in the Roman theatre for changing their facial makeup. After putting on the mask, audience expected the person to perform a role in a particular manner. It did not, however, mean that the person enacting the given role necessarily possessed those qualities. For a layperson, personality generally refers to a physical or external appearance of an individual. For example, when we find someone good looking, we often assume that the person also has a charming personality. This notion of personality is based on superficial impressions, which may not be correct. In psychological terms, personality refers to our characteristic ways of responding to individuals and situations. People can easily describe the way in which they respond to various situations. Certain catchwords are often used to describe personalities. These words refer to different components of personality. In this sense, personality refers to unique and relatively stable qualities that characterize an individual's behavior across different situations over a period of time. If you watch closely, you will find that people do not show variations in their behavior. One is not always cautious or impulsive, shy or friendly. Personality characteristic individuals as they appear in most circumstances. Consistency in behavior, thought, and emotion of an individual across situations and across time periods characterizes her or his personality. For example, an honest person is more likely to remain honest irrespective of time or situation. However, situational variations in behavior do occur as they help individuals in adapting to their environmental circumstances. In brief, personality is characterized by the following. It has both physical and psychological components. Its expression in terms of behavior is fairly unique to a given individual. Its main features do not easily change with time. It is dynamic in the sense that some of its features may change due to internal or external situation demands. Thus, personality is adaptive to situations. Once we are able to characterize someone's personality, we can predict how that person will probably behave in a variety of circumstances. An understanding of personality allows us to deal with people in realistic and acceptable ways. For example, if you find a child who does not like orders, the most effective way to deal with that child will be not to give orders, but to present a set of acceptable alternatives from which the child may choose. Similarly, a child who has feelings of inferiority needs to be treated differently from a child who is self confident. Several other terms are used to refer behavioral characteristics of individuals. Quite often, they are used as synonyms of personality. Some of the terms are given in box along with their defining features. You may read them carefully to appreciate how they are different from notion of personality. Major approaches to the study of personality. Psychologists interested in the study of personality try to answer certain questions about the nature and origin of individual differences in personality. You may have observed that two children in the same family develop dramatically different personalities. Not only they look physically different, but they also behave differently in different situations. These observations of generate curiosity and force us to ask, why is it that some people react differently in a given situation than others? Why is it that some people enjoy adventurous activities while others like reading, watching television, or playing cards? Are these differences stable all through one's life, or are they just short lived and situation specific? A number of approaches and theories have been developed to understand and explain behavioral differences among the individuals and behavioral consistencies within an individual. These theories are based on different models of human behavior. Each throws light on some but not all aspects of personality. Psychologists distinguish between type and trait approaches to personality. The type approaches attempts to comprehend human personality by examining certain broad patterns in the observed behavioral characteristics of individuals. Each which each behavioral pattern refers to one type in which individuals are placed in terms of the similarity of their behavioral characteristics with the pattern. In contrast, the trait approach focuses on the specific psychological attributes along which individuals tend to differ in consistent and stable ways. For example, one person may be less shy, whereas another may be more, or one person may be less friendly, whereas another may be more less. Here, shyness and friendliness represent traits along which individuals can be rated in terms of the degree of presence of absence of the concerned behavior, quality, or trait. The interactional approach holds that situational characteristics play an important role in determining our behavior. People may behave as dependent or independent not because of their internal personality trait but because of external rewards or threats available in a particular situation. The cross situational consistency of traits is found to be quite low. The compelling influence of situations can be noted by observing people's behavior in places like market, a courtroom, or a place of worship. Type approaches. As we explained above, personality types are used to represent and communicate a set of expected behaviors based on similarities. Efforts to categorize people into personality types have been made since ancient times. The Greek physician Hippocrates and proposed a typology of personality based on fluid or humor. He classified people into four types: sanguine, phlegmatic, melancholic, and choleric, each characterized by specific behavioral features. In all India, also Charak Samhita, a famous treatise on Ayurveda, classifies people on the characteristics of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha on the basis of three humoral elements called Tridosha. Each refers to a type of temperament called Prakriti of a person. Apart from this, there is also a typology of personality based on the three gunas, that is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva guna includes attributes like cleanliness, truthfulness, dutifulness, detachment, discipline, etc. Rajas guna include intensive activity, desire for sense gratification, dissatisfaction, envy for others, and materialistic mentality. Tamas guna characterizes anger, arrogance, depression, laziness, feeling of helplessness, etc. All the three gunas are present in each and every person in different degrees. The dominance of one over the other guna may lead to a particular type of behavior. Within psychology, the personality types given by Sheldon are fairly well known, using body build and temperament as the main basis. Sheldon proposed endomorphic, mesomorphic, and ectomorphic typology. The endomorphs are fat, soft, and round. By temperament, they are relaxed and sociable. The mesomorphs are strong, muscular, are rectangular with a body strong build. They are energetic and courageous. The ectomorphs are thin, long, and fragile in body build. They are brainy, artistic, and introvert. Let us remember that these body typologies are simple and have limited use in predicting behavior of individuals. They are more like stereotypes which people hold. Jung has proposed another important typology by grouping people into introverts and extroverts. This is widely recognized. According to this typology, introverts are people who prefer to be alone, tend to avoid others, withdraw themselves in the face of emotional conflicts, and are shy. Extroverts, on the other hand, are sociable, outgoing, drawn to occupations that allow dealing directly with people, and react to stress by trying to lose themselves among people and social activity. In recent years, Friedman and Rosenman have classified individuals into type A and type B personalities. These two researchers were trying to identify psychological risk factors. When they discovered these types, people characterized by type A personality seem to possess high motivation, lack patience, feel short of time, be in a great hurry, and feel like being always burdened with work. Such people find it difficult to slow down and relax. People with type A personality are more susceptible to problems like hypertension and coronary heart disease. The risk of developing CHD with type A personality is sometimes even greater than the risk caused by high blood pressure, high cholesterol levels, or smoking. Opposite to this, type B personality, which can be understood as the absence of type A traits, this typology has been further extended. Morris suggested a type C personality which is prone to cancer. Individuals characterized by this personality are cooperative, unassertive, and patient. They suppress their negative emotions and show compliance to authority. More recently, type D personality has been suggested, which is characterized by proneness to depression. Personality typologies are usually very appealing, but are too simplistic. Human behavior is highly complex and variable. Assigning people to a particular personality type is difficult. People do not fit into such simple categorization schemes so neatly. Trait approaches. These theories are mainly concerned with the description or characterization of basic components of personality. They try to discover the building blocks of personality. Human beings display a wide range of variations in psychological attributes. Yet, it is possible to club them into smaller number of personality traits. Trait approach is very similar to our common experience in everyday life. For example, when we come to know that a person is sociable, we assume that she or he will not only be cooperative, friendly, and helping, but also engage in behaviors that involve other social components. Thus, trait approach attempts to identify primary characteristics of people. A trait is considered as a relatively enduring attribute or quality on which one individual differs from another. They include a range of possible behaviors that are activated according to the demands of the situation. To summarize, traits are relatively stable over time. They are generally consistent across situations, and their strengths and combinations vary across individuals, leading to individual differences in personality. A number of psychologists have used traits to formulate their theories of personality. We'll discuss some important theories. Allport's trait theory. Gordon Allport is considered the pioneer of trait approach. He proposed that individuals possess a number of traits which are dynamic in nature. They determine behavior in such a manner that an individual approaches different situations with similar plans. The traits integrate stimuli and responses which otherwise look dissimilar. Allport argued that the words people use to describe themselves and others provide a basis for understanding human personality. He analyzed the words of English language to look for the trait which describe a person. Allport, based on this, characterized traits into cardinal, central, and secondary. Cardinal traits are highly generalized dispositions. They indicate the goal around which a person's entire life seems to revolve. Mahatma Gandhi's non-violence and Hitler's Nazism are examples of cardinal traits. Such traits often get associated with the name of the person so strongly that they derive such identities as the Gandhian or Hitlerian trait. Less pervasive in effect, but still quite generalized dispositions are called central traits. These traits are often used in writing a testimonial or job recommendation for a person. The least generalized characteristics of a person are called secondary traits. Traits such as likes mangoes or prefers ethnic clothes are examples of secondary traits. While Allport acknowledged the influence of situations on behavior, he held the way a person reacts to given situations depend on or her or his traits. Although people sharing the same traits might express them in different ways, Allport considered traits more like intervening variables that occur between the stimulus situation and response of the person. This meant that any variation in traits would elicit a different response to the same situation. Cattell personality factors. Raymond Cattell believed that there is a common structure on which people differ from each other. This structure could be determined empirically. He tried to identify the primary traits from a huge array of descriptive adjectives found in language. He applied a statistical technique called factor analysis to discover the common structures. He found 16 primary or source traits. The source traits are stable and are considered as the building blocks of personality. Besides these, there are also a number of surface traits that result out of the interaction of source traits. Cattell described the source traits in terms of opposing tendencies. He developed a test called 16 Personality Factor Questionnaire for the assessment of personality. This test is widely used by psychologists. Eysenck's theory. H.J. Eysenck proposed that personality could be reduced into two broad dimensions. They are biologically and genetically based. Each dimension subsumes a number of specific traits. These dimensions are neuroticism versus emotional stability. It refers to the degree to which people have control over their feelings. At one extreme of the dimension, we find people who are neurotic. They are anxious, moody, touchy, restless, and quickly lose control. At the other extreme lie who are calm, even-tempered, reliable, and remain under control. Extroversion versus introversion. It refers to the degree to which people are socially outgoing or socially withdrawn. At one extreme are those who are active, gregarious, impulsive, and thrill-seeking. At the other extreme are people who are passive, quiet, cautious, and reserved. In a later work, Eysenck proposed a third dimension called psychoticism versus sociability, which is considered to interact with the other two dimensions mentioned above. A person who scores high on psychoticism dimensions tends to be hostile, egocentric, and antisocial. Eysenck Personality Questionnaire is a test which is used for studying these dimensions of personality. The trait approach is very popular and many advances in this respect are taking place. These are beyond the scope of the present studies. A new formulation has also been advanced that provides a novel scheme of organizing traits. This new formulation is given in box 2.2. Psychodynamic approach. This is highly popular approach to studying personality. This view owes largely to the contributions of Sigmund Freud. He was a physician and developed his theory in the course of his clinical practice. Early in his career, he used hypnosis to treat people with physical and emotional problems. He noted that many of his patients needed to talk about their problems, and having talked about them, they often felt better. Freud used Freud association, a method in which a person is asked to openly share all the thoughts, feelings, and ideas that come to her or his mind, dream analysis, and analysis of errors to understand the internal functioning of the mind. Level of consciousness. Freud's theory considered the sources and consequences of emotional conflicts and the way people deal with these. In doing so, it visualizes the human mind in terms of three levels of consciousness. The first level is conscious, which includes the thoughts, feelings, and actions of which people are aware. The second level is preconscious, which includes mental activity of people which may be aware only if they attend to it closely. The third level is unconscious, which includes mental activity that people are unaware of. According to Freud, the unconscious is a reservoir of instinctive or animal drives. It also stores all ideas and wishes that are concealed from conscious awareness. Perhaps because they lead to psychological conflicts, most of these arise from sexual desires which cannot be expressed openly and therefore are repressed. People constantly struggle to find either some socially acceptable ways to express unconscious impulses or to keep those impulses away from being expressed. Unsuccessful resolution of conflicts result in abnormal behavior. Analysis of forgetting, mispronunciations, jokes, and dreams provide us with a means to approach the unconscious. Freud developed a therapeutic procedure called psychoanalysis. The basic goal of psychoanalytic therapy is to bring the repressed unconscious material to consciousness, thereby helping people to live in a more self-aware, integrated manner. Structure of personality. According to Freud's theory, the primary structural elements of personality are three, that is, ID, ego, and superego. They reside in the unconscious as forces and can be inferred from ways people behave. Let us remember that ID, ego, and superego are concepts, not real physical structures. We'll discuss these terms in detail. ID, it is the source of instinctual energy. It deals with immediate gratification of primitive needs, sexual desires, aggressive impulses. It works on the pleasure principle, which assumes that seek pleasure and try to avoid pain. Freud considered much of a person's instinctual energy to be sexual and the rest as aggressive. ID does not care for moral values, society, or other individuals. Ego, it grows out of ID and seeks to satisfy individuals' instinctual needs in accordance with reality. It works by the reality principle and often directs the ID towards the appropriate ways of behaving. For example, the idea of a boy who wants an ice cream cone tells him to grab the cone and eat it. His ego tells him that if he grabs the cone without asking, he may be punished. Working on the reality principle, the boy knows the best way to achieve gratification is to ask for permission to eat the cone. Thus, while the ID is demanding and realistic and works according to pleasure principle, the ego is patient, reasonable, and works by reality principle. Superego. The best way to characterize the superego is to think of it as a moral branch of mental functioning. The superego tells the ID and the ego whether gratification in a particular instance is ethical. It helps control the ID by internalizing the process of socialization. For example, if a boy sees and wants an ice cream cone and asks his mother for it, his superego will indicate that his behavior is morally correct. This approach towards obtaining ice cream will not create guilt, fear, or anxiety in the boy. Thus, in terms of individual functioning, Freud thought of unconscious as being composed of three competing forces. In some people, the ID is stronger than the superego. In others, it is the superego. The relative strength of the ID, ego, and superego determines each person's stability. Freud also assumed that ID is energized by two instinctual forces called the life instinct and death instinct. He paid less attention to the death instinct and focused more on the life instinct. The instinctual life force that energizes the ID is called libido. It works on the pleasure principle and seeks immediate gratification. Ego defense mechanisms. According to Freud, much of the human behavior reflects an attempt to deal with escape from anxiety. Thus, how the ego deals with anxiety largely depends on how people behave. Freud believed that people avoid anxiety mainly by developing defense mechanisms that try to defend the ego against the awareness of the instinctual needs. Thus, defense mechanism is a way of reducing anxiety by distorting reality. Although some defense against anxiety is normal and adaptive, people use these mechanisms to such an extent that reality is truly distorted, develop various forms of maladjustment. Freud has described many different kinds of defense mechanisms. The most important is repulsion, in which anxiety-provoking behaviors or thoughts are totally dismissed by the unconscious. When people repress a feeling or desire, they become totally unaware of that wish or desire. Thus, when a person says, "I do not why I did that," some repressed feeling or desire is expressing itself. Other major defense mechanisms are projection, denial, reaction formations, and rationalization. In projection, people attribute their own traits to others. That the person who has strong aggressive tendencies may see other people as acting in an excessively aggressive way towards her or him. In denial, a person totally refuses to accept reality. Thus, someone suffering from HIV or AIDS may altogether deny her or his illness. In reaction formation, a person defends against anxiety by adopting behaviors opposite to her or his true feelings. A person with strong sexual urges who channels his or her energy into religious fervor presents a classical example of reaction formation. In rationalization, a person tries to make unreasonable feelings or behavior seem reasonable and acceptable. For example, when a student buys a new set of pens after doing poorly in an examination, she may try to rationalize her or his behavior by asserting, "I will do much better with these pens." People use defense mechanism are often unaware of doing so. Each defense mechanism is a way for the ego to deal with uncomfortable feelings produced by anxiety. However, Freud's ideas about the role of defense mechanism have been questioned. For example, his claim that projection reduces anxiety and stress has not found support in several studies. Stages of personality development. Freud claims that core aspects of personality are established early, remain stable throughout life, and can be changed only with great difficulty. He proposed a 5 stage theory of personality development. Problems encountered at any stage may arrest development and have long term effect on personal life. A brief description of these stages is given below. Oral stage, a newborn's instincts are focused on the mouth. This is the infant's primary pleasure seeking center. It is through the mouth that the baby obtains food that reduces hunger. The infant achieves oral gratification through feeding, thumb sucking, biting, and babbling. It is these early months that people's basic feelings about the world are established. Thus, for Freud, an adult who considers the world a better place probably had difficulty during the oral stage of development. Anal stage, it is found that around ages 2 to 3, children learn to respond to some of the demands of the society. One of the principal demands made by parents is that child learns to control the bodily functions of urination and defecation. Most children at this stage experience pleasure in moving their bowels. The anal area of the body becomes the focus of certain pleasurable feelings. This stage establishes the basis for conflict between the I and the ego, and between the desire for babyish pleasure and demand for adult controlled behavior. Phallic stage, this stage focuses on the genitals. At around ages 4 and 5, children begin realizing the differences between males and females. They become aware of sexuality and the sexual relationship between their parents. During this stage, the male child experiences the Oedipus complex, which involves love for the mother, hostility towards the father, and the consequent fear of punishment or castration by the father. A major development achievement of this stage is resolution of the Oedipus complex. This takes place by accepting his father's relationship with his mother and modeling his own behavior after his father. For girls, Oedipus complex follows a slightly different course. By attaching her love to the father, a girl tries to symbolically marry him and raise a family. When she realizes that this is unlikely, she begins to identify with her mother and copy her behavior as a means of getting her father's affection. The critical component in resolving the Oedipus complex is the development of identification with the same-sex parents. In other words, boys give up sexual feelings for their mothers and begin to see their fathers as role models rather than rivals. Girls give up their sexual desires for the father and identify with their mother. Latency stage. This stage lasts from about 7 years until puberty. During this period, child continues to grow physically, but sexual urges are relatively inactive. Much of a child's energy is channeled into social or achievement-related activities. Genital stage. During this stage, the person attains maturity in psychosexual development. The sexuality, fears, and repressed feelings of earlier stages are once again exhibited. People learn to deal with members of the opposite sex in a socially and sexually mature way. However, if the journey towards this stage is marked by excessive stress or overindulgence, it may cause fixation to an early stage of development. Freud's theory also postulates that as children proceed from one stage to another stage of development, they seem to adjust their view of the world. Failure of a child to pass successfully through a stage leads to fixation to that stage. In this situation, the child's development gets arrested at an earlier stage. For example, a child who does not pass successfully through the phallic stage fails to resolve Oedipus complex and may still feel hostile toward the parent of the same sex. This failure may have serious consequences for the child's life. Such a boy may come to consider that men are generally hostile and may wish to relate to females in a dependable relationship. Regression is also a likely outcome in such situations. It takes a person back to an earlier stage. Regression occurs when a person's resolution of problems at any stage of development is less than adequate. In this situation, people display behaviors typical of a less mature stage of development. Post-Freudian approaches. A number of theorists further developed their ideas following Freud. Some had worked with him and then moved on to develop their own version of the psychoanalytic theory. These theorists have been called neo-analytic or post-Freudian in order to differentiate their work from Freud's. These theories are characterized by less prominent roles to sexual and aggressive tendencies of the id and expansion of the concept of ego. The human qualities of creativity, competence, and problem solving abilities are emphasized. Some of these theories are briefly described here. Carl Jung. Aims and aspirations. Carl Jung worked with Freud in early stages of career, but later on he broke away from Freud. Jung saw human beings guided as much as by aims and aspiration as by sex and aggression. He developed his own theory of personality called analytical psychology. The basic assumption of this theory is that personality consists of competing forces and structures within the individual that must be balanced rather than between the individual and the demands of society or between the individual and reality. Jung claimed that there was collective unconsciousness consisting of archetypes or primordial images. These are not individually acquired but are inherited. The God or Mother Earth is a good example of archetypes. They are found in myths, dreams, and arts of all mankind. Jung held that the self strives for unity and oneness. It is an archetype that is expressed in many ways. He devoted much of his efforts to the study of such expressions in various traditions. According to him, for achieving unity and wholeness, a person must become increasingly aware of the wisdom available in one's personal and collective unconscious, and must learn to live in harmony with it. Karen Horney, Optimism. Horney was another disciple of Freud who developed a theory that deviated from basic Freudian principles. She adopted a more optimistic view of human life with emphasis on human growth and self-actualization. Horney's growth major contribution lies in her challenge to Freud's treatment of women as inferior. According to her, each sex has attributes to be admired by the other, and neither sex can be viewed as superior or inferior. She encountered that women were more likely to be affected by social and cultural factors than by biological factors. She argued that psychological disorders were caused by disturbed interpersonal relationships during childhood. When parents' behavior toward a child is indifferent, discouraging, and erratic, the child feels insecure, and a feeling called basic anxiety results. Deep resentment towards parents or basic hostility occurs due to anxiety by showing excessive dominance or indifference, or by providing too much or too little approval. Parents can generate among children feelings of isolation and helplessness which interfere with their healthy development. Alfred Adler, Lifestyle and Social Interest. Adler's theory is known as individual psychology. His basic assumption is that human behavior is purposeful and goal directed. Each one of us has the capacity to choose and create. Our personal goals are the sources of our motivation. The goals that provide us with security and help us in overcoming the feelings of inadequacy are important in our personality development. In Adler's view, every individual suffers from feelings of inadequacy and guilt, that is inferiority complex, which arise from childhood. Overcoming this complex is essential for optimal personality development. Erich Fromm, The Human Concerns. In contrast to Freud's biological orientation, Fromm developed this theory from a social orientation. He viewed human beings as social beings who could be understood in terms of their relationship with others. He argued that psychological qualities such as growth and realization of potentials resulted from desire for freedom and striving for justice and truth. Fromm holds that character traits develop from our experiences with other individuals, while culture is shaped by the mode of existence of a given society. People's dominant character traits in a given society work as forces in shaping the social processes and the culture itself. His work recognizes the value of positive qualities such as tenderness and love in personality development. Erik Erikson searched for identity. Erik's theory lays stress on rational, conscious ego processes in personality development. In his theory, development is viewed as a lifelong process, and ego identity is granted a central place in this process. His concept of identity crisis of adolescent age has drawn considerable attention. Erikson argues that young people must generate for themselves a central perspective and a direction that can give them a meaningful sense of unity and purpose. Psychodynamic theories face strong criticism from many quarters. The major criticisms are as follows. The theories are largely based on case studies. They lack a rigorous scientific basis. They use small and atypical individual samples for advancing generalizations. The concepts are not properly defined, and it is difficult to submit them to scientific testing. Freud has used males as a prototype of all human personality development. He overlooked female experiences and perspectives. Behavioral approach. This approach does not give importance to the internal dynamics of behavior. The behaviorists believe in data which they feel are definable, observable, and measurable. Thus, they focus on learning on stimulus response, connections, and their reinforcement. According to them, personality can be best understood as the response of an individual to the environment. They see the development characteristics simply as a change in response. That is, person learns new behaviors in response to new environments and stimuli. For most behaviorists, the structural unit of personality is the response. Each response is a behavior which is emitted to satisfy a specific need. As you know, all of us eat because of hunger, but we are also very choosy about foods. For example, children do not like eating many of the vegetables like spinach, pumpkin, gourds, etc. But gradually they learn to eat them. Why did they do so? According to the behavioral approach, children may initially learn to eat vegetables in anticipation of appreciation from their parents. Later on, they may eventually learn to eat vegetables not only because their parents are pleased with this behavior, but also because they acquire the taste of those vegetables and find them good. Thus, the core tendency that organizes behavior is the reduction of biological or social needs that energize behavior. This is accomplished through responses that are reinforced. From your study in class 11th, you may recall that there are several different learning principles that involve the use of stimuli, responses, and reinforcement in different ways. The theories of classical conditioning, instrumental conditioning, and observational learning are well known to you. These theories view learning and maintenance of behavior from different angles. The principles of these theories have been widely used in developing personality theories. For example, observational learning theory considers thought processes extremely important in learning, but these find almost no place in classical or instrumental conditioning theories. Observational learning theory also emphasizes social learning and self-regulation, which again is missed out in other theories. Cultural approach. This approach attempts to understand personality in relation to the features of ecological and cultural environment. It proposes that a group's economic maintenance system plays a vital role in the origin of cultural and behavioral variations. The climatic conditions, the nature of terrain, of the habitat, and the availability of food in it determine not only people's economic activities but also their settlement patterns, social structures, division of labor, and other features such as child rearing practices. Taken together, these elements constitute a child's overall learning environment. People's skills, abilities, behavioral styles, and value priorities are viewed as strongly linked to those features. Rituals, ceremonies, religious practices, arts, recreational activities, games, and play are the means through which people's personality gets projected in a culture. People develop various personality qualities in an attempt to adapt the ecological and cultural features of a group's life. Thus, the cultural approach considers personality as an adaptation of individuals or groups to the demands of their ecology and culture. Let us try to understand these aspects with a concrete example. As you know, a good proportion of the world's population even today lives in forest and mountainous regions, with hunting and gathering as their primary means of livelihood. The Birhod of Jharkhand represents such a population. Most of them in the nomadic life, which requires constant movement in small bands from one forest to another in search of games and other forest products. In Bihar society, children from a early age are allowed to have enormous freedom to move into forest, and they're learning hunting and gathering skills. Their child socialization practices are also aimed at making children independent, autonomous, and achievement oriented from an early age of life. In agriculture societies, children are socialized to be obedient to elders, nurturing to youngsters, and responsible to their duties. Since these behavioral qualities make people more functional in agricultural societies, they become dominant features of people's personality in contrast to independence, autonomy, and achievement, which are more functional in hunting gathering societies because of different economic pursuits and cultural demands. Children in hunting, gathering, and agricultural activities and societies develop and display different personality patterns. Humanistic approach. The humanistic theories are mainly developed in response to Freud's theory. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow have particularly contributed to the development of humanistic perspective on personality. We'll briefly examine their theories. The most important idea proposed by Rogers is that of a fully functioning person. He believes that fulfillment is the motivating force for personality development. People try to express their capabilities, potentials, and talents to the fullest extent possible. There is an inborn tendency among persons that directs them to actualize their inherited nature. Rogers makes two basic assumptions about human behavior. One is that behavior is goal directed and worthwhile. The second is that people will always choose adaptive self-actualizing behavior. Rogers' theory grew out of his experiences listening to patients in his clinic. He noted that self was an important element in the experience of his clients. Thus, his theory is structured around the concept of self. The theory assumes that people are constantly engaged in the process of actualizing their true self. Rogers suggests that each person also has a concept of ideal self. An ideal self is a self that a person would like to be. When there is correspondence between the real self and ideal self, a person is generally happy. Discrepancy between the real self and ideal self often results in unhappiness and dissatisfaction. Rogers' basic principle is that people have tendency to maximize self-concept through self-actualization. In this process, the self grows, expands, and becomes more social. Rogers views personality development as a continuous process. It involves learning to evaluate oneself and mastering the process of self actualization. He recognizes the role of social influences in the development of self concept. When social conditions are positive, the self concept and self esteem are high. In contrast, when the conditions are negative, the self concept and self esteem are low. People with high self concept and self esteem are generally flexible and open to new experiences, so they can continue to grow and self actualize. This situation warrants that an atmosphere of unconditional positive regard must be created in order to ensure enhancement of people's self concept. The client centered therapy that Rogers developed basically attempts to create this condition. You are familiar with the hierarchy of needs propounded by Maslow from a study of motivation in class 11th. Maslow has given a detailed account of psychologically healthy people in terms of their attainment of self actualization. a state in which people have reached their own fullest potential. Maslow had an optimistic and positive view of man who had the potentialities for love, joy, and to do creative work. Human beings are considered free to shape their lives and to self actualize. Self actualization becomes possible by analyzing the motivations that govern our life. We know that biological security and belongingness needs are commonly found among animals and human beings. Thus, an individual's sole concern with the satisfaction of these needs reduces her or him to the level of animals. The real journey of human life begins with the pursuit of self esteem and self actualization needs. The humanistic approach emphasizes the significance of positive aspects of life. See box 2.3. Assessment of personality. Assessment of personality. To know, understand, and describe people is a task in which everybody is involved in day to day life. When we meet new people, we often try to understand them and we even predict what they may do before we interact with them. In our personal lives, we rely on our past experiences, observations, conversations, and information obtained from other persons. This approach to understanding others may be influenced by a number of factors that may color our judgment and reduce objectivity. Hence, we need to organize our efforts more formally to analyze personalities. A formal effort aimed at understanding personality of an individual is termed as personality assessment. Assessment refers to the procedures used to evaluate or differentiate people on the basis of certain characteristics. The goal of assessment is to understand and predict behavior with minimum error and maximum accuracy. In assessment, we try to study what a person generally does or how she or he behaves in a given situation. Besides promoting our understanding, assessment is also useful for diagnosis, training, placement, counseling, and other purposes. Psychologists have tried to assess personality in various ways. The most commonly used techniques are psychometric tests, self-report measures, projective techniques, and behavioral analysis. These techniques are rooted in different theoretical orientations, hence, they grow light on different aspects of personality. You have read about psychometric tests in the previous chapter. We'll discuss the other methods. Self-report measures. It was Alport who suggested that the best method to assess a person is by asking him or her about himself or herself. This led to the use of self-report measures. These are fairly structured measures, often based on theory, that require subjects to give verbal responses using some kind of rating scale. The method requires the subject to objectively feel and report her or his feelings with respect to various items. The responses are accepted at their face value. They are scored in quantitative terms and are interpreted on the basis of norms developed for the test. Some of the well-known self-report measures are briefly described below. The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This inventory is widely used as a test in personality assessment. Hathaway and McKinley developed this test as a helping tool for psychiatric diagnosis, but the test has been found very effective in identifying varieties of psychopathology. Its revised version is available as MMPI-2. It consists of 567 statements. The subject has to judge each statement as true or false for her or him. The test is divided into 10 subscales which seek to diagnose hypochondriasis, depression, hysteria, psychopathic deviate, masculinity, femininity, paranoia, psychasthenia, schizophrenia, mania, and social introversion. In India, Malik and Joshi have developed the Jodhpur Multiphasic Personality Inventory along the lines of MMPI. Eysenck Personality Questionnaire, developed by Eysenck. This test initially assessed two dimensions of personality called introverted, extroverted, and emotionally stable, emotionally unstable. These dimensions are characterized by 32 personality traits. Later on, Eysenck added a third dimension called psychoticism. It is linked to psychopathology that represent a lack of feeling for the others, a tough manner of interacting with people, and a tendency to defy social conventions. A person scoring high on this dimension tends to be hostile, egocentric, and antisocial. This test is also widely used. 16 Personality Factor Questionnaire. This test was developed by Cattell. On the basis of studies, he identified a large set of personality descriptors which were subjected to factor analysis to identify the basic personality structure. You will learn about this statistical technique later. The test provides with declarative statements and the subject responds to a specific situation by choosing from a set of given alternatives. The test can be used with high school level students as well as with adults. It has been found extremely useful in career guidance, vocational exploration, and occupational testing. Apart from few popular tests which use self-report technique which have been described above, there are several others that try to assess specific dimensions of personality. As you proceed further with your study of psychology, you'll come to know more about them. The self-report measure suffers from a number of problems. Social desirability is one of them. It is a tendency on the part of the respondent to endorse items in a socially desirable manner. Acquiescence is another one. It is tendency of the subject to agree with items, questions irrespective of their contents. It often appears in the form of saying yes to items. These tendencies render the assessment of personality less reliable. It is also necessary to sound a note of caution at this stage. Remember that psychological testing and understanding personality requires great skill and training. Unless you have acquired these to an optimum level under careful supervision of an expert, you should not venture into testing and interpreting the personality of your friends who do not study psychology. Projective techniques, the techniques of personality assessment described so far, are known as direct techniques because they tend to rely on information directly obtained from the person who clearly knows that her or his personality is being assessed. In these situations, people generally become self-conscious and hesitate to share their private feelings, thoughts, and motivations. When they do so, they often do it in a socially desirable manner. The psychoanalytic theory tells us that a large part of human behavior is governed by unconscious motives. Direct methods of personality assessment cannot uncover the unconscious part of our behavior. Hence, they fail to provide us with a real picture of an individual's personality. These problems can be overcome by using indirect methods of assessment. Projective techniques fall in this category. Projective techniques were developed to assess unconscious motives and feelings. These techniques are based on the assumption that a less structured or unstructured stimulus or situation will allow the individual to project her or his feelings, desires, and needs onto that situation. These projections are interpreted by experts. A variety of projective techniques have been developed. They use various kinds of stimulus materials and situations for assessing personality. Some of them require reporting associations with stimuli. Some involve the writing around pictures. Some require sentence completion. Some require expression through drawings. And some require choice of stimuli from a large set of stimuli. While the nature of stimuli and responses in these techniques vary enormously, all of them do share the following features. The stimuli are relatively or fully unstructured or poorly defined. The person being assessed is usually not told about the purpose of assessment and method of storing and interpretation. The person is informed that there are no correct or incorrect responses. Each response is considered to reveal a significant aspect of personality. Scoring and interpretation are lengthy and sometimes subjective. Projective techniques are different from psychometric tests in many ways. They cannot be scored in any objective manner. They generally require qualitative analysis, for which a rigorous training is needed. In the following pages, some of the well-known projective techniques are briefly discussed. The Rorschach and Kulbrot test. This test was developed by Hermann Rorschach. The test consists of 10 ink blots. 5 of them are in black and white, 2 with some red ink, and the remaining 3 in some pastel colors. The blots are symmetrical in design with a specific shape or form. Each blot is printed on the center of a white cardboard of about 7 inch into 10 inch size. The blots were originally made by dropping ink on a piece of paper and then folding the paper in half. The The cards are administered individually in two phases. In the first phase, called performance proper, the subjects are shown the cards and are asked to tell what they see in each of them. In the second phase, called inquiry, a detailed report is prepared by asking subject to tell where, how, and on what basis was the particular response made. Fine judgment is necessary to place the subject's responses in a meaningful context. The use and interpretation of this test requires extensive training. Computer techniques too have been developed for analysis of data. The thematic perception test. This test was developed by Morgan and Murray. It was a little more structured than the inkblot test. The test consists of 30 black and white picture cards and one blank card. Each picture card depicts one or more people in a variety of situations. Each picture is printed on a card. Some cards are used with adult males or females, others are used with boys or girls, still others are used with some combinations. 20 cards are appropriate for a subject, although a lesser number of cards have also been successfully used. The cards are presented one at a time. The subject is asked to tell a story describing the situation presented in the picture. What led to the situation? What is happening at the moment? What will happen in the future? And what the characters are feeling and thinking. A standard procedure is available for scoring TAT responses. The test has been modified for children and for aged. Umar Chaudhary's Indian adaptation of TAT is also available. An example is given. Rosenwig's picture frustration study. This study was developed by Rosenwig and to assess how people express aggression in face of frustrating situation. The test presents with the help of cartoon like a picture a series of situations in which one person frustrates another or calls attention to a frustrating condition. The subject is asked to tell what the other person will say or do. The analysis response is based on the type and direction of aggression. An attempt is made to examine whether the focus is on the frustrating object or on protection of the frustrated person or on constructive solution of the problem. The direction of aggression may be towards the environment, towards oneself, or it may be turned off in an attempt to gloss over or evade the situation. Parikh had adopted this test for use with the Indian population. Sentence completion test. This test makes use of a number of incomplete sentences. The starting of the sentence is provided and subject has to provide an ending to the sentence. It is held that the type of ending used by subjects reflects their attitude, motivation and conflicts. The test provides subject with several opportunities to reveal their underlying unconscious motivations. A few sample items of sentence completion tests are given below. Draw a person test. It is a simple test in which subject is asked to draw a person on a sheet of paper. A pencil and eraser are provided to facilitate drawing. After the completion of this drawing, the subject is generally asked to draw the figure of an opposite sex person. Finally, the subject is asked to make a story about the person as if she or he was a character in a novel or play. Some examples of interpretation are follows. Omission of facial features suggests that the person tries to evade a highly conflict-ridden interpersonal relationship. Graphic emphasis on the neck suggests lack of control over impulses. Disproportionately large head suggests organic brain disease and preoccupation with headaches. The analysis of personality with the help of projective techniques appears fairly interesting. It helps to understand unconscious motives, deep-rooted conflicts, and emotional complexes of an individual. However, the interpretation of the responses requires sophisticated skills and specialized training. There are problems associated with the reliability of scoring and validity of interpretations, but the practitioners have found these techniques quite useful. Behavioral analysis. A person's behavior in a variety of situations can provide us with meaningful information about her or his personality. Observation of behavior serves as the basis of behavioral analysis, and observers' report may contain data obtained from interview, observation, ratings, nomination, and situational test. We will examine these different procedures in some detail. Interview is commonly used method for assessing personality. This involves talking to the person being assessed and asking specific questions. Diagnostic interviewing generally involves in depth interviewing, which seeks to go beyond the replies given by the person. Interviews may be structured or unstructured depending on the purpose or goals of assessment. In unstructured interviews, the interviewer seeks to develop an impression about a person by asking a number of questions. The way a person presents her or himself and answers the question carries enough potential to reveal her or his personality. The structured interviews address very specific questions and address very specific questions and follow a set of procedure. This is often done to make objective comparison of persons being interviewed. Use of rating scales may be further enhance the objectivity of evaluations. Observation. Behavioral observation is another method which is commonly used for assessment of personality. Although all of us watch people and form impressions about their personality, use of observation for personality assessment is a sophisticated procedure that cannot be carried out by untrained people. It requires careful training of the observer and a fairly detailed guideline about analysis of behaviors in order to assess the personality of a given person. For example, a clinical psychologist may like to observe her or his client's interaction with family members and home visitors. With carefully designed observation, the clinical psychologist may gain considerable insight into a client's personality. In spite of their frequent and widespread use, observation and interview methods are characterized by the following limitations. Professional training required for collection of useful data through these methods is quite demanding and time consuming. Maturity of the psychologist is a precondition for obtaining valid data through these techniques. Mere presence of the observer may contaminate the result. As a stranger, the observer may influence the behavior of the person being observed and does not obtain good data. Behavioral ratings are frequently used for assessment of personality in educational and industrial settings. Behavioral ratings are generally taken from people who know the assessee intimately and have interacted with her or him over a period of time or have a chance to observe her or him. They attempt to put individuals into certain categories in terms of their behavioral qualities. The categories may involve a different number of descriptive terms. It has been found that use of numbers or general descriptive adjectives in rating scales always creates confusion for the rater. In order to use rating effectively, the trait should be clearly defined in terms of carefully stated behavioral anchors. The method of rating suffers from following major limitations. Raters often display certain biases that color their judgments of different traits. For example, most of us are greatly influenced by a single favorable or unfavorable trait. This forms the basis of raters' overall judgment of a person. This tendency is known as halo effect. Raters have a tendency to place individuals either in the middle of the scale by avoiding extreme positions or in extreme positions by avoiding middle categories on the scale. These tendencies can be overcome by providing raters with appropriate training or by developing such skills which can be used in which response bias is likely to be small. Nomination. This method is often used in obtaining peer assessment. It can be used with persons who have been in long-term interaction and who know each other very well. In using nomination, each person is asked to choose one or more person of the group with whom she or he would like to work, study, play, or participate in any other activity. The person may also be asked to specify the reason for her or his choices. Nomination thus received may be analyzed to understand the personality and behavioral qualities of the person. This technique has been found to be highly dependable, although it may also be affected by personal biases. Situational test. A variety of situational tests have been devised for the assessment of personality. The most commonly used test of this kind is the situational stress test. It provides us with information about how a person behaves under stressful situations. The test requires a person to perform a given task with other persons who are instructed to be non-cooperative and interfering. The test involves a kind of role-playing. The person is instructed to play a role for which he or she is observed. A verbal report is also obtained on what she or he was asked to do. The situation may be a realistic one or it may be created through a video play. Summary: the study of self and personality helps understand ourselves as well as others. An individual self developed through social interaction with significant others. There are different kinds of self, such as personal self, social self, relational self, self esteem, and self efficacy, are two very important aspects of behavior, which have far reaching consequences in our life. The psychological techniques of self regulation include systematic observation of one's behavior, self reinforcement, and self instruction. Personality refers to psychophysical characteristics of a person that are relatively stable across situations and over time and make her or him unique. Since personality helps us in adapting to a variety of situations in our life, it is likely to change as a result of external or internal forces. Personality has been studied through several approaches. The most prominent among these are typologic, psychodynamic, behavioral, cultural, and humanistic approaches. The typological approach attempts to describe personality in terms of few types, which are characterized by a culture of trust. Allport, Cattell, and Eysenck have advocated a trait approach to personality, which offers a unified view of a person. Freud developed psychodynamic approach and discussed personality in terms of a constant conflict between our internal forces called ID, ego, and superego. In Freud's view, unconscious conflicts are rooted in the process of psychosexual development, which occurs through oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. Post-Freudian theories focus on interpersonal forces and the contemporary circumstances of life. Jung, from Elder Horney and Erikson, brought out the role of ego and social forces in personality. The behavioral approach views personality as the response of an individual to the environment. They consider response as a structural unit of personality which is emitted to satisfy a specific need. The cultural approach attempts to comprehend personality in terms of the demands of adaptation made on individuals by economic maintenance systems and the resulting cultural features of a group of people. The humanistic approach focuses on subjective experiences of individuals and their choices. Rogers emphasized the relationship between real self and the ideal self. The congruence of these cells make a person fully functioning. Maslow discussed personality in terms of interplay of needs that motivated people. The needs could be arranged in a hierarchy from lower order needs to higher order needs. Personality assessment refers to the procedure of analyzing and evaluating people in terms of certain psychological characteristics. The goal is to predict an individual's behavior with a high degree of accuracy. An individual's personality can be assessed by using observer reports, projectile techniques, and self-report measures. Observer reports include interview, observation, ratings, nomination, and situational tests. Rorschach's ink blot test and thematic appreciation test are widely used projective tests for personality. Self-report measures attempt to assess personality by using fairly structured tests